He wore a uniform to honor his son, but they tried to throw him out in front of everyone. What happened next left the entire room in shock and brought some to tears. It was a day meant to be remembered forever, a high school graduation filled with joy, anticipation, and pride. The gymnasium was packed. Banners hung from the rafters, students were lined up in caps and gowns, and families filled every row of seats, clutching flowers, balloons, and cameras, ready to capture the big moment. In the third row from the front, surrounded by excited chatter and warm smiles, sat Marcus Johnson, a tall, proud man with broad shoulders and a dignified posture. He wore a crisp, dark blue military jacket, polished shoes, and a chest full of service medals that gleamed under the overhead lights. His face was serious, but his eyes were soft, filled with emotion. He was there for one reason: to watch his only son, Jalen, graduate. Marcus had served over 20 years in the United States Marine Corps. He'd been deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan. He'd led missions, saved lives, and lost friends. But nothing, absolutely nothing, meant more to him than this moment, seeing his son walk across that stage and receive his diploma. Then, just as the principal took the mic to begin the ceremony, 2 security guards began walking down the aisle. They weren't smiling. Their expressions were sharp and serious, and their eyes locked onto Marcus. Whispers rippled through the audience as the guards reached him. One leaned down and said firmly but without emotion, "Sir, we're going to have to ask you to leave." Marcus blinked. "Excuse me?" he asked quietly, keeping his voice low out of respect for the ongoing ceremony. The second guard spoke louder. "It's school policy. No military uniforms allowed inside the ceremony. You'll need to exit immediately." People in the surrounding seats turned to watch. A few gasped. A nearby mother clutched her child's hand tightly. "That's a Marine," someone whispered. "Why are they asking him to leave?" another murmured. Marcus remained calm, just as he had in the most dangerous situations overseas. He didn't argue. He didn't make a scene. Slowly he stood up. He straightened his jacket, glanced once more toward the stage, and nodded silently. He was heartbroken, but he wouldn't show it. He had taught Jalen about honor, about composure, and about standing tall even when the world felt unfair. As he took his first step toward the exit, the room grew quiet. Even the students on stage noticed something was happening. Phones came out, cameras started rolling, parents looked at each other, confused, even outraged. A proud Marine who had risked his life for this country was being told he couldn't watch his son graduate because of a uniform. But just as Marcus neared the exit, the double doors at the back of the hall burst open. 6 tall men in sharp black suits entered with calm, focused energy. The crowd turned again. These weren't just guests, they were Navy SEALs, and they were about to change everything. As the 6 suited men strode into the auditorium, their presence was unmistakable. Tall, disciplined, and serious-faced, they carried themselves with the unmistakable confidence of men who had seen war and walked back from it. The guards at the door hesitated for a moment, their posture stiffening as the newcomers scanned the room. One of the SEALs pointed toward Marcus, now just steps away from the exit. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice calm but edged with authority. One of the guards responded nervously, "It's the dress code, sir. No military attire allowed." The SEAL raised an eyebrow. "That's a retired U.S. Marine, a decorated veteran. And he's here for his son's graduation, not a fashion show." The room was frozen, all eyes watching. But Marcus, he remained composed. Years of discipline had trained him for this. His instincts told him to de-escalate, not embarrass his son on one of the most important days of his life. He raised a hand gently toward the SEALs. "It's fine," he said in a quiet voice. "Let's not make a scene." But the lead SEAL shook his head. "No, Marcus, not this time. You see, these weren't just random veterans. They were his brothers in arms. Marcus had served alongside them in the same battalion. They'd shared meals in desert camps, carried each other through firefights, and mourned fallen comrades together. They had seen the best and worst of the world together. To them, Marcus wasn't just a friend, he was a hero. One of them stepped forward, Commander James Riley, and turned toward the audience. His voice carried through the room like thunder. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the interruption. But we will not let a fellow Marine, a man who has bled for this country, be walked out of his son's graduation because of his uniform. There was a moment of stunned silence, then murmurs, then applause. Light at first, but building. Another SEAL added, "Marcus Johnson didn't wear this jacket for attention. He wore it because he's proud of the nation his son is about to serve in his own way, by graduating and starting his future." Parents in the crowd began to nod. Some stood up, a few shouted, "Let him stay." A student on stage clapped slowly. The guards looked overwhelmed. They turned to the principal, who was now approaching in a rush, clearly rattled by the unfolding situation. Marcus still stood near the exit, torn between pride and pain. He had never wanted to be the center of attention. All he had wanted was to quietly witness the moment his boy became a man. But now, because of a policy lacking empathy, he stood at the crossroads of humiliation and dignity, and his dignity never wavered. No anger, no outburst, just a father, silent, proud, and refusing to let anything, even disrespect, overshadow his son's big day. The room, once buzzing with excitement, had gone still. All attention was now locked on the scene unfolding near the exit doors. Marcus Johnson, retired U.S. Marine, had been asked to leave the ceremony, but just before stepping out, 6 men had arrived who weren't going to let that happen. The Navy SEALs formed a tight line near the back of the auditorium. Their suits were sharp, but their movements gave away something deeper: military precision, brotherhood, purpose. They hadn't come just to attend. They had come to stand beside Marcus. One by one, they stepped forward, positioning themselves between Marcus and the guards. The lead SEAL, Commander James Riley, turned to face the principal and school administrators, who were now nervously whispering among themselves. "Let's be clear," Riley said, projecting his voice so the whole auditorium could hear. "If this Marine walks out of this building, then all 6 of us walk out too. And we're not just walking out. We're taking this story to every news station in the city." Gasps echoed through the hall. A few audience members started clapping quietly. Some took out their phones and began filming. Riley wasn't finished. "This isn't just about a jacket. This is about a man who fought for your freedom. A man who buried his own brothers in arms so that we could sit here safely and watch our kids graduate. And now you're telling him his uniform is a problem." One of the guards looked like he wanted to speak, but the SEAL beside him cut in. "Let me ask you something," he said. "If this man had come in wearing a football jersey, would you have thrown him out? What if he was wearing a 3-piece suit covered in brand logos? Would that have been school policy too?" No answer. The principal, red-faced and clearly flustered, finally took the microphone and tried to calm the room. "Everyone, please, we understand your concerns. We're just trying to uphold the school's dress code. There was no offense intended." But the audience wasn't buying it anymore. A mother stood up from the 4th row and shouted, "That man should be in the front row. He should be honored, not escorted out." The auditorium erupted into applause. Students on stage began clapping too. Teachers whispered to one another, visibly unsure of how to proceed. Through it all, Marcus remained silent. He hadn't asked for this. He didn't want to be the center of attention. He had come to see one thing: his son, Jalen, walk across that stage. But now, whether he liked it or not, he had become a symbol of integrity, sacrifice, and quiet strength. The very values that his uniform represented, and he wasn't standing alone anymore. As the auditorium buzzed with rising support, the story behind the man at the center of it all began to unfold. A story many in the crowd had never heard until now. Marcus Johnson wasn't just a Marine who had served his country. He was a man who had given his entire life to it. Born and raised in a tough neighborhood in Detroit, Marcus had enlisted in the Marine Corps straight out of high school. It was his way out and his way forward. Over the next 2 decades, he would rise through the ranks, earn multiple commendations, and serve with honor in both Iraq and Afghanistan. He had led dangerous missions, rescued hostages, and stood firm in situations most people couldn't imagine surviving. His jacket, the one the guards had called inappropriate, bore medals that told the story of a warrior, a leader, and a survivor. But those medals also told a more personal story, one of sacrifice. During his last deployment, Marcus had received a message no soldier ever wants to hear. His wife, Cynthia, had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. She died just months after he returned home. From that day forward, Marcus became a single father, raising his son Jalen on his own while still battling PTSD and adjusting to civilian life. He took odd jobs to make ends meet. He volunteered at local schools. He mentored young boys in his neighborhood, many of whom had no fathers at all. But through every challenge, his mission was always the same: to give his son a future he never had. And now that son was graduating. Jalen was a smart, kind-hearted young man with dreams of becoming an engineer. He had earned honors, joined clubs, and stayed out of trouble. And there, sitting in the third row, wearing the jacket that held a lifetime of blood, sweat, and tears, was the man who had made it all possible. But none of that mattered to the guards. To them, it was just a jacket that didn't follow policy. To Marcus, it was a suit of honor. As the crowd learned the truth about Marcus, through whispers, murmurs, and a few brave voices who shared his story aloud, the mood began to shift completely. People who had sat silent before were now standing. More students clapped from the stage. Even some teachers had tears in their eyes. This wasn't just about a uniform. It was about what the uniform stood for: discipline, service, sacrifice, family. And now the question hanging in the air wasn't whether Marcus could stay. It was whether the school would finally honor the man they had tried to quietly remove. The crowd had made their choice. The uniform that had once drawn judgment now drew respect. Just when it seemed like the tension couldn't grow any thicker, something unexpected happened. The auditorium lights dimmed slightly, the signal that the ceremony was about to officially begin again. But before the announcer could call the first graduate's name, the principal slowly stepped forward, visibly shaken, holding the microphone with both hands. He looked around at the packed gym, cleared his throat, and said, "Before we continue, I need to say something." The room fell silent. There are moments in life when rules must be upheld, but there are also moments, he paused, looking directly at Marcus, when we must recognize that some people don't just follow rules, they live by a code much higher than that. He stepped away from the podium and walked toward Marcus, who still stood quietly near the exit. "I want to personally apologize to you, Mr. Johnson. You shouldn't have been asked to leave. You should have been thanked." A wave of emotion rippled through the crowd. Applause burst out, loud and long. Some were standing now, some wiping their eyes. One by one, the 6 Navy SEALs nodded their respect. The principal turned to them and said, "And to all of you, thank you for reminding us of what respect and brotherhood truly look like." Then the principal did something no one expected. He reached out and took Marcus by the arm and said into the mic, "Would you do us the honor of joining me on stage to hand your son his diploma personally?" Gasps, cheers. A few people shouted "yes" from the back of the gym. Marcus froze for a moment, completely stunned. His eyes widened, not out of fear, but disbelief. For a man who had faced war zones without blinking, this single act of recognition nearly brought him to tears. He nodded slowly, his voice barely audible. "I'd be honored." And as he walked down the aisle, this time not toward the exit, but toward the stage, the entire audience rose to their feet. Applause thundered through the room. Flags waved, students stomped their feet in celebration, even teachers had tears in their eyes. And then the name was called over the loudspeaker, Jalen Marcus Johnson. From the far end of the stage, a tall, smiling young man walked out. His cap slightly tilted, his gown perfectly pressed. His eyes locked onto his father's. He tried to stay composed, but the emotion got to him. His smile turned into a tearful laugh. They met center stage, father and son. Marcus handed him the diploma, pulled him in for a tight hug, and whispered something only Jalen could hear. "Your mother would be so proud of you." And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not policies, not uniforms, not controversy, just a proud father, a grateful son, and a room full of people who had just witnessed the real meaning of honor. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe it and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more powerful, real-life stories that inspire and uplift. And let us know in the comments, what would you have done in that moment?